and you'll notice other tabs at the top of this dialog. In this lesson, we're not going to talk about triangulation lines or faces or triangulation files. We'll do that much further into the class. But here under this tab, under the triangulation tab, it says use an inclusion or exclusion area. And by that, that's a fancy way of saying, do you have a polyline that is describing a boundary where you want to contour all the points inside or outside, meaning inclusion or exclusion. And I also like to check ignore zero elevations when we create this topography. And another option that you should check is erase previous contour entities. Oftentimes I'll discover once I get some topography on the screen, oops, I've got a bad shot, I've got to correct it. And if we come right back into this dialog and we say generate new contours, it will erase the old ones first. So it's really handy. And that's about all you need to know about the triangulate and contour tabs for now. Labels, we're not going to draw our labels automatically, so we're not going to talk about those features. And we're not going to talk about how it selects the entities to use in generating the contours. And we don't talk about them because you're not going to change these. You're free to experiment as we get further into the class, but in general, you already know what you need to know to draw contours. So let's do that. So we've set up all the information it needs. I'm going to say OK. So notice at the command line that it's asking us for an inclusion perimeter, polyline, or enter for none. Well, I forgot to draw one because I wanted to illustrate just what it's going to do without one, so I'm just going to select enter. And the next question is select an exclusion parameter. And I don't have one of those set up just yet, so I'm going to select enter for none. And the final question is select the points and break lines to triangulate. So we're going to say all here because we wanted to use all of the data in the drawing. Am I done selecting all my data? Yes, I am. So I'm just going to say enter again. And there, it drew the contours that fast. Notice what happens out at the edges where the point data clearly ends. The contours want to do some strange things. You can see it's pulling back on itself. It's trying to interpolate to a nearby point, and we really would rather it didn't do that. We've also got something going on here that is a little odd, and that may or may not be existing topography, but I doubt that it is. So there's something going on there. And we have a little bump in our contouring here. It probably indicates that we have some disturbed terrain on the lot, and indeed we did in this particular case. But I wanted to illustrate that the contour lines will begin to really take hard turns at the edge of the point data if you don't have an inclusion area. So let's do that. Carlson makes it easy for you to do that. We go under the Draw menu and we come down to a very oddly named command called Shrink Wrap Entities. And once you see what it does, you'll say, yes, it's very appropriate. So let's select that. It's asking us to shrink wrap across gaps or bounds between our points. rather than to get into a lot of detail, we're just going to take the defaults, gap, shrink wrap layer. I'm just going to take the default of 0. It says select the entities to shrink wrap. I'm going to say all. And I'm done with my selection set, so I hit enter one more time. And now it's saying the perimeter that it's about to draw. Just how tight to the existing data do you want it to be? And I'm just going to leave the default 2. And do I want to create a 2D or a 3D polyline? I'm going to take the default again. And notice what it did. It drew a polyline around all of that point data, and it included the polylines in that collection set. Now normally you do this before you drew any contours so that it would only snap to point data. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to erase those contours. Okay, now that I've got the contours erased, let's repeat that command. Draw, shrink wrap entities. Just take the defaults, select entities. I'm going to say all. I'm done selecting entities, so I'll hit enter. I will take this default as well. And notice the polyline is now snapped itself to the points that represent the extents of the point data. And now let's go back to surface, triangulate and contour. We don't need to change any of the settings. It remembered the settings from the last time. Say OK. And this time, when it says select the inclusion perimeter, I have a polyline to select. So I do. Enter. Now it's saying select an exclusion perimeter. If I had drawn this building as a polyline, I could have selected it and it would not have drawn contours through it. It would have excluded contours from inside of that polyline. But because they're just lines, I don't have that option available to me. But I will show you how to turn lines into polylines in the future. So we're just going to take our defaults, select the entities now, select the points, and say all here. We're done selecting our points, hit enter. And it drew our contours for us just that quickly. We can now choose to either turn off the layer that has that polyline on it, or you can do what I do. I typically will erase it because I don't need it. And now we need to add some contour labels. Again, under the surface menu, contour labels, contour elevation label. And it opens a dialog box and it asks you what layer you want to put it on, what text style you would like to use, the scale that has been set in the drawing, and the text size scalar, meaning it's going to take this number and multiply it times that number to come up with the height of the text. So in this case, 0.1 times 20 is going to be 2. So the text height for these labels will be 2. And I have found that that works just fine. And if it isn't set to 0.1, then I typically will do it. And we can take the rest of the defaults, say OK. And now it wants you to draw a line that slices the end of the contour, or where you want this label to be placed. Well, I typically want them placed at the end of my contours, but there might be a time where you want some labels shown in the middle. But for this illustration, it says pick the first point of this line. Well, it's going to be there. And you use that wheel to zoom in and zoom out. And if you need to pan, you can do that too. I'm still within the command. And I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to go to there. And you'll notice at the command line, it's saying pick the second point. So we're going to do that right now. Pick. And it drew those contour labels. Now notice what the command line is saying. Carlson is very friendly this way. It says, okay, you just finished those labels. I know you want to continue because you haven't hit the escape key. So let's pick the first point of your next line. So let's do that. Let's say we're going to go from there to there. Great. And again, it loops right back. Pick the first point. So we'll pick the first point. Pick the second point. Pick the first point. Pick the second point. And so on. Until you've finished placing labels wherever you wanted them. Something going on with that contour. And you've just completed your first topography lesson. Now we would have to decide whether that little bump in the contour was representative of what was really there. And if it wasn't, we can choose to edit that out until we're satisfied. And when we have our buildings, we would use the trim command and we would trim the contours out of the building. Zoom, extents, and there's a rough worksheet. And that's where we're going to end for this session. So we covered an awful lot of ground. We talked about point data, raw files, which are actually the files that generate the CRD. So it contains a lot more information and does allow you to manipulate it to affect the CRD file or the coordinate file. We took a look at a number of typical options available under the point menu, how to edit that data either collectively by bringing up a spreadsheet showing all of the points, or how to edit an individual point. And then we finished up with quickly getting contours into the drawing using the point data.